The rain didn't care that Emily Carter had exactly 14 corn dogs left on the griddle and 22 minutes before the Hongdae night market closed for the evening. It fell in silver curtains across the narrow lane, hammering the tin awning of her food cart with the persistence of something that had a personal grudge. Emily stood beneath it anyway, spatula in hand, forearm glistening, her blonde ponytail plastered flat against the back of her neck. She'd had a ponytail every single day for 3 years in Seoul. It was the most practical decision she'd ever made, and some days she was quietly proud of it, the way other women might be proud of a promotion or a vacation. Practical. That word had become the scaffolding of her entire life. She flipped the last batch of bulgogi corn dogs with a flick of the wrist born from 10,000 repetitions. The batter sizzled, golden and fragrant. Around her, the market stalls were already going dark. The tteokbokki vendor 2 lanes over, the honey butter chip cart, even the noisy pojangmaka where drunk businessmen liked to shout into their soju cups. The rain had chased them all home. But Emily Carter didn't have the luxury of leaving early. She did the math without meaning to, the numbers clicking through her head the way a cash register clicks whether you're listening or not. Rent on the studio apartment in Mapogu, 650,000 won. Lily's after-school program, 180,000. The visa renewal fee that had arrived in her email inbox this morning like a small quiet disaster, 320,000. She had exactly 410,000 won left in her checking account. This cart, this humble rain-battered cart with its hand-painted English sign that read Little Chicago Seoul, was the only thing standing between her and a phone call she never wanted to make. The phone call where she had to tell her mother back in Naperville, Illinois, that she'd failed. Again. She wasn't going to make that call. Mommy. The small voice drifted up from behind the counter. Emily leaned sideways and found Lily curled on the folding camp stool, knees tucked, a box of crayons balanced on her lap and a coloring book open across her thighs. Lily had hazel eyes exactly like Emily's, a gap where her left incisor used to live, and the spectacular, unhurried faith of a 7-year-old who believed her mother could handle anything. Still here, baby, Emily said. Is it almost done? Lily yawned behind her crayon, forest green. She was coloring a frog. Almost. Can we get ramen on the way home? The spicy kind. The mild kind. Mild is boring. Mild is what we're having. Lily considered this with the gravity of a small philosopher and returned to the frog. Emily smiled, a real one, exhausted around the edges but real, and turned back to the griddle. That was when she saw him. He materialized from the dark space between the stalls the way a bruise materializes on skin, slowly and then all at once. He was enormous. Not tall in the ordinary way but tall in the way of something built rather than grown, broad through the shoulder, filling the lane. He wore a dark coat soaked through to charcoal. One side of his face caught the orange light from her griddle lamp, and what she saw made her breath catch and hold. Blood. Not a cut on his lip, not a scrape. There was a long split above his left cheekbone, dark and ugly, and something wrong at his ribs. The way he held himself told her that even before she saw the hand pressed low against his side. Emily Carter had spent 4 years married to a man who occasionally came home in a similar condition, and the difference between the fear she'd felt then and what she felt now was this. Then she had always instinctively looked for the exit. Now she looked the stranger directly in the eye. His eyes were black. Not dark brown, black, the kind that had forgotten how to ask for things. She did not run. She pulled 2 corn dogs from the griddle, the last 2 the ones she'd been saving to sell, and held them out across the counter. On the house, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, just faintly colored with a Midwest softness she'd never quite lost. You look like you need them more than I need the sale. The man stared at her. Not at the food. At her. Behind the counter, Lily peered around Emily's hip, crayon still in hand. She tilted her head at the enormous bloodied stranger the way children tilt their heads at things that are interesting rather than frightening. Are you a dragon? Lily asked. Something moved across the man's face. Something that wasn't quite an expression but was the shadow where an expression used to live. He reached out and took the corn dogs. His knuckles were scarred in the particular way of a man who had been using his hands as weapons for a very long time. He did not say thank you. He did not say anything. He simply stood in the rain eating her food, and Emily Carter stood on the other side of the counter watching him, the spatula still in her hand, thinking that she had no idea who this man was. She was right about that. She had no idea at all. What she knew, standing in the rain at 11:15 on a Wednesday in Hongdae night market, was this. She had been afraid of men for 4 years, and something about looking this one in the eye had made her less afraid, not more. She didn't understand that yet. She just felt it, the way you feel a change in the weather before you can name the wind. Everything was about to change. And Emily Carter, practical, ponytailed, 14 corndog Emily Carter, was going to be the reason why. Hey everyone, drop in the comments, where exactly are you watching from today? And be honest. If you were that single mom staring at a bloodied stranger who looked like he owned the night, what would you do in her situation? Let's see your answers before we dive in. The story of Emily Carter really began 3 years before that rainy Wednesday, in a suburb of Chicago on a night when the snow was falling so quietly it felt like the world was trying to tell a secret. She had been 31 then, and her name had been Emily Novak for 4 years, and she was standing in a bathroom with a bruise flowering across her left cheekbone, staring at her own reflection with the specific calm that comes after you've made a decision so large it hollows you out and fills the space with something cold and resolute. Marcus had hit her 3 times before. This was the 4th. She had told herself after the 2nd that there would not be a 4th. She had been wrong. But she was not wrong about this. There would not be a 5th. She didn't have a plan so much as a direction. Her friend Jiyeon from the ESL teaching program at Northwestern had been working in Seoul for 2 years and had told her, over coffee, over the phone, over 100 small gestures of love, that the city had space for someone like Emily. That English teachers were valued there. That you could start over in Seoul. That the Han River at night was so wide and so lit up that standing beside it made your problems feel a different size. Emily had been pregnant for 6 weeks. She hadn't told Marcus. She wasn't going to. She packed 1 suitcase while he slept. She took Lily's embryonic heartbeat and her own battered resilience and her ESL certification and she got on a plane. The Chicago skyline fell away beneath the clouds and Emily Carter. She reclaimed her maiden name in the taxi to O'Hare, pressed her forehead against the cold oval window and said goodbye to the woman she was no longer going to be. Seoul met her with its chaos and its neon and its particular kindness toward people who were willing to work. She got a teaching job at a hagwon in Sinchon within 2 weeks of landing. She had Lily in a hospital in Mapogu in July, a delivery that was long and frightening and conducted partly through a translator, and when they put Lily on her chest for the first time Emily had looked down at those scrunched hazel eyes and felt something crystallize in her chest that has no word in English. It is the word for, I will become whatever this child needs me to be. She taught English for a year. Then 2. She got good at it. She got good at navigating the city, at reading the subway map without thinking, at bargaining with the Halmiani vegetable sellers in Mangwon Market in her stumbling, persistent Korean that got less stumbling every month. She built a life the way you build a wall, 1 brick, 1 day, 1 small victory at a time. The food cart was her idea, her madness, her dream. Jiyeon's older brother had a permit for a spot in Hongdae night market that he wasn't using. Emily had spent 6 months saving, 3 months planning, and 1 terrifying afternoon signing paperwork she only half understood. She painted the cart herself, white with red and blue trim. She wrote Little Chicago Seoul in her own handwriting across the top. She developed a menu that was hers. Bulgogi corn dogs, kimchi Chicago-style hot dogs with gochujang relish, sweet potato fries with ranch dipping sauce reinvented with doenjang. It was a strange little menu. Visitors loved it. Locals tried it once, skeptically, and came back. By year 3 she was making enough to cover rent, Lily's school, food, and not quite enough more to stop doing the math in her head every night before she fell asleep. She was tired in the way of someone who carries everything alone. She was proud in the way of someone who built something from zero. She was lonely in the way that she did not, usually, let herself admit. The loneliness was the thing she kept in the back of the cabinet. She had decided, not with bitterness but with a clear-eyed pragmatism, that love, romantic love, partnership love, the kind that required trust, was not going to be part of the rebuilt version of her life. She had given that to Marcus and it had cost her the most expensive thing she owned. She was not going to do it again. She was just going to take care of Lily. That was the whole plan. Which is what made that Wednesday night in the rain so confounding. After the man left, stepped back into the dark between the stalls and was simply gone, the way shadows are gone when you look at them directly, Emily stood at her griddle for a long moment not moving. The rain hammered the awning. The last corn dog, the one she'd been going to sell for 6,001, was gone. She hadn't taken any money for it. She hadn't even asked his name. She noticed too late that he'd left something on the counter. It was folded, tucked under the empty corn dog tray where she'd set it while she talked to him. She unfolded it carefully, 50,001. Not the 6,000 she'd been owed. 50,000. More than 8 times what the 2 corn dogs were worth. Emily stared at the bill for a long time. Was he a dragon? Lily asked, peering up at her. I don't know what he was, Emily said honestly. He looked like a dragon, Lily said, with the certainty of a child who has assessed the matter fully. Dragons are scary, but they're not always bad. In my book, the dragon is actually very nice and just misunderstood. That's one kind of story, Emily said. She folded the 50,000 won into her apron pocket. She helped Lily into her little rain jacket. She folded the cart awning and latched the side panels and began the 20-minute walk home through the wet Hongdae lanes, Lily on her back piggyback style because the child was nearly asleep before they'd cleared the market gate. The weight of her daughter was the best weight Emily knew. She walked through the rain with it, breathing. She thought once about the man's eyes. The absolute darkness of them. The way he had looked at her as if she were something he had not encountered before, something he didn't have a category for. She didn't think about him after that. She had too much math to do. What she couldn't know, was that on the other side of the city a black car moved through the rain at speed, carrying a man whose knuckles were still bleeding and whose ribs were cracked along the left side and who had eaten bulgogi corn dogs for the first time in his 42 years of life while a 7-year-old girl asked him if he was a dragon. She didn't know he was thinking about the American woman who had looked him in the eye and offered him the last things she had left to sell. She didn't know he had already decided to come back. He came back on Thursday. Emily almost didn't notice him at first. The market was busy, a Thursday crowd, university students and couples and the occasional tourist group with a guide holding up a little flag, and she had a line of 5 people and a fresh batch of corn dogs on the griddle and Lily perched on the camp stool doing homework with the focused scowl of someone who finds subtraction personally offensive. She was making change for a pair of girls in matching bucket hats when she felt it, the particular weight of being watched. Not the ordinary surveillance of a customer trying to decide what to order. Something more deliberate. She looked up. He was standing at the far end of her counter, away from the line, dressed in dark clothes with his hands in his pockets. No blood tonight. His face was cleanly composed, the cut above his cheekbone sealed over into a dark line that would probably scar. He was watching her with those black eyes, entirely still, in the way of a very large animal that is deciding whether the situation requires it to do anything. Emily finished making change. She served the next customer. She moved down the counter to him. "Bulgogi corn dog?" she said. Something flickered in those eyes. It might have been amusement. Yes. His Korean-accented English was low and precise, each word placed with the care of someone who learned the language as a tool rather than a pleasure. 1 or 2? 2. She turned to the griddle. Her hands were busy, they were always busy, always moving, always doing the next small necessary thing, and her mind was doing its own work, quiet and watchful. She'd been afraid of men for 4 years. She was aware that this man was large and scarred and had appeared out of nowhere bleeding. She was aware that she should perhaps be more afraid than she was. She handed him the corn dogs. He handed her money, exact change this time. She put it in the till. "Are you feeling better?" she asked. She didn't know why. It came out before she'd decided to say it. He looked at her. "Better than what?" "Better than yesterday. When you were bleeding on my counter." Pause. "I'm fine." "Good," she said and went back to her griddle. He stayed. Not hovering, not intrusive, just standing at the end of the counter in the particular way of a man who has decided he is staying and doesn't need to explain it. Emily served 3 more customers. The market noise swirled around them. At some point she realized she was talking the way she always did when she cooked, narrating small things, the corn dog batter recipe she'd adjusted 4 times before it was right, the fact that Lily had a school play next week and didn't know her lines, the way the rain in Seoul was different from Chicago rain, heavier somehow. She wasn't sure when she'd started talking to him specifically rather than just into the air. She looked over and found him listening with a focus that was a little startling, the way you're startled when you discover someone has been genuinely paying attention. "I talk too much when I cook," she said. "No," he said. She didn't know what that meant, that she didn't talk too much or that no, he hadn't minded or something else entirely. She went back to flipping. He came back on Friday. And Saturday. And the following Tuesday, which had been a cold night with a bite of early autumn in the air, and Emily had made a batch of sweet potato fries on impulse and handed him some without asking, and he had stood at the counter eating them and watching the market lane with the air of someone conducting a private survey. She didn't know then what she'd later learn, that his survey was not of the market. The drunk customer happened on that same Tuesday, a man who'd had too much soju and had decided Emily's laughter at something Lily said was an invitation. He leaned on the counter with the florid confidence of the very drunk. He said things in Korean that Emily's vocabulary was not quite broad enough to catch entirely, but she understood the tone perfectly. She'd heard that tone before in an apartment in Evanston, and her whole body went a particular kind of quiet and careful. She said clearly in Korean, "Please go. I'm working." He said something else. He reached for her hand. She stepped back out of reach, processing her options. There was a panic button linked to the market security. She'd made sure of that after a night 6 months ago when a different man had lingered too long. And then, without drama, without sound, the drunk man was simply gone. She blinked. He was across the lane, being walked firmly in the other direction by someone she'd never seen before. A young man, compact and efficient, who appeared from nowhere and disappeared back into it. Emily turned. Yoo Jinho. She didn't know his name yet. She thought of him only as the Dragon Man, a concession to Lily's taxonomy, was standing at the end of her counter exactly as he had been, corn dog in hand, looking at the middle distance as if nothing had occurred. "Did you just," she started. "Do you need anything else?" he said. She stared at him. He met her gaze with the absolute composure of someone who had never been uncomfortable in his life, or had been uncomfortable so often it amounted to the same thing. "No," she said slowly. "Thank you." He nodded once. He finished his corn dog. Emily thought about this on the walk home, Lily riding her back and already asleep, mouth slightly open, smelling of crayon and sesame oil. She had not asked for help. No one had asked her permission. He had simply, quietly, invisibly removed the problem. She should have felt patronized, maybe. She'd spent 3 years being very deliberate about not needing anyone, about being the kind of woman who handled things. But she thought about the moment her body had gone quiet and careful when that drunk man reached for her. She thought about how many times in the last 3 years she'd gone quiet and careful and handled things entirely alone. There was something about not having to do it alone, even once, even in a small way she hadn't asked for, that made her eyes sting on the walk home in a way she wasn't prepared for. She thought about his hands. The scars on them, old and layered, the kind that accrued over years. She thought about Lily saying, with her gap-toothed certainty, "Dragons are not always bad." "I don't know what you are," she said quietly to the night, to no one. The next evening, Lily saw him coming and broke into a gap-toothed grin. "Uncle Dragon," she shouted, with the particular volume of a child who has decided something is wonderful and sees no reason to moderate the announcement. Emily closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, Yoo Jinho was standing at the counter looking at Lily with an expression that Emily had not seen on his face before. It was not quite warmth. It was more like the first light before warmth, the moment when the sky is not yet bright but has remembered that it can be. "Hi," Lily said. A beat. Then gravely, "Hello. I'm Lily. My mom says I talk too much but Uncle Dragon doesn't talk enough, so we balance out." Emily pressed her lips together. She turned very deliberately back to the griddle. Behind her, she heard Lily ask, "What's your favorite color?" And after a long pause that she wouldn't have predicted, she heard him say, "Black." And Lily, without missing a beat, said, "That's not really a color, but that's okay." Emily laughed. She laughed quietly into the griddle's smoke, surprised by it, glad he couldn't see her face. She was starting, without wanting to look forward to the evenings. The threat arrived on a Friday evening in the form of 3 young men who had the specific swagger of people who had been told they were frightening and believed it. Emily had seen men like this before, not in Seoul but in the part of Chicago where Marcus used to take her to his friends' garage parties, where there was always someone performing a kind of power they didn't actually have. These 3 were performing the same thing. They wore the same clothes. They had the same flat, evaluating look. One of them stopped at her cart. The other 2 hung back in the lane, hands in pockets, watching. "Carter say," the first one said, using her name in a way that made the back of her neck prickle. He'd done research. He knew her name. "Can I help you?" she said in Korean. Her voice was level. She was already doing the quiet and careful thing, which she hated, but Lily was on the camp stool 4 feet behind her and that changed every calculation. "Your spot here?" the man said. He had a gold tooth, she noticed. "There are people who need it. You should probably think about moving on." "I have a permit," she said. "Permits can be complicated. Mine isn't." She kept her voice pleasant, the way she'd learned to do 4 years ago in an apartment in Evanston when she was trying not to make things worse. "I paid for this spot legally. I'm not interested in moving." One of the men in the lane took a step forward. Emily felt her heart accelerate in the particular way of the body knowing danger before the mind catches up. She thought, Lily. She thought, Lily is 4 feet behind me. She thought, do not show that you're afraid because fear is an invitation. Mommy? Lily's voice, small and uncertain. "It's okay, sweetheart," Emily said without turning around. "Keep coloring." The gold-toothed man was saying something else. something about the kind of complications that happened to people who didn't listen, when he stopped talking. He stopped talking because of the way the two men behind him had gone absolutely, completely still. Emily felt it before she saw it. The change in the lane's atmosphere, the way the temperature of a room changes when someone walks in who changes it. She looked past the gold-toothed man and saw Yoo Jinho stepping out of the shadows at the market's edge. He walked with the absolute unhurried certainty of someone who has never in his life had to hurry for anything. He was dressed simply, dark jacket, dark trousers, but something about the way he occupied space made the lane feel narrower than it was. The two men in the lane saw him first. They went pale in a way Emily noted with a distant, clinical part of her brain. They recognized him. Whatever they had thought this errand was going to be, they were rapidly revising. Yoo Jinho stopped beside the gold-toothed man. He didn't touch him. He didn't raise his voice. He said something in Korean, low and clean, that Emily's language skills were good enough to mostly catch. Something about whose territory this was and what happened to people who forgot that. Then he looked at the gold-toothed man with those black eyes for 3 seconds. 3 seconds. The men left. Not in a hurry, that would have been too honest, but with the particular speed of people who have discovered they had somewhere else to be. They were gone from the lane in under a minute. Emily watched them go. Then she let out a breath she had been holding so long it left her dizzy. "Mommy." Lily was at her hip, crayon still in hand. She pressed her small face against Emily's side. Emily put her arm around her daughter and held on. "It's okay," she said. Her voice was slightly less steady now that the performance was over. "It's all okay." Yoo Jinho was still standing at the end of the counter. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not triumph, not concern exactly, something more complicated than either. Emily looked at him over Lily's head. "Who were they?" she asked. "Rivals," he said. One word. Clay. She understood then more than he'd said. If they were rivals, then he was the other side. She'd felt it for weeks, the shape of him too large and too still and too composed for any ordinary life, and she had decided deliberately not to examine it. She was examining it now. "Are you going to tell me who you actually are?" she said. A pause that contained many things. "Not tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. Lily had gone back to her stool, partially reassured, though she was watching from under her brow with the focused attention of a child who has understood more than the adults think. Emily came around the end of the counter. She was aware, doing it, that she was choosing to be on the same side of the counter as him, not behind the safety of the cart, out in the lane. She wasn't sure why she did it. She stood perhaps 3 feet from him, which brought her face only to his shoulder, and tilted her head back to look at him properly. "Thank you," she said. "For whatever just happened. They won't come back." "You can't know that." "I can." The certainty in it was absolute, unornamented. He said it the way a mason might say, "That wall will hold." Not boasting. Just accurate. Emily studied the cut above his cheekbone, now mostly healed. The scarred knuckles. The perfect stillness. "Are you dangerous?" she asked. It came out quieter than she intended, almost conversational. "Yes," he said. She appreciated the honesty so much it almost undid her. "To me?" she asked. "Or to Lily?" Something moved across his face then. Something that she had no framework for yet but would learn to recognize later as the thing he looked like when he was being fractured open by a question he hadn't expected. "No," he said. She nodded slowly. She believed him, which was its own astonishing thing. "I don't know your name," she said. "Yoo Jinho." "Emily Carter." She almost offered her hand and then didn't. Too much too fast. "You've been coming to my cart for 2 weeks, Yoo Jinho." "I like the food." "Ah," she said. His lips moved. It might have been the beginning of a smile. "You and your daughter," he said, "are my priority now. I want you to understand that." She stared at him. Those words, their plainness, their lack of flourish, landed somewhere in her chest with a weight she wasn't ready for. "That's a very large thing to say to someone who just sells corn dogs," she said. "It's accurate," he said. Emily looked up at the rain-washed Seoul sky, a strip of amber-lit cloud between the buildings, and breathed. She had not had anyone say anything like that to her in 4 years. She had, in fact, organized her entire life around not needing anyone to say it. She turned back to the cart. "Well," she said, "since you're staying, you can help me fold the awning. It sticks on the left side and I always have to do it twice." He came around the counter without hesitation. He was there, tall and solid, in the narrow space behind her cart, and together they folded the awning, him pulling the left side steady while she worked the latch, and it didn't stick at all for once, and Emily stood there with the folded canvas in her arms, feeling something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. She felt seen. Not as a problem to be managed. Not as a single mom who needed help she couldn't ask for. Seen as Emily Carter, standing in a Seoul night market lane in the rain, competent and tired and exactly where she'd chosen to be. Same time tomorrow, she said. Yes, said Yoo Jinho. She noticed the cart upgrades on a Monday morning. She arrived at the market at 9:30 to do her prep work, chopping, battering, setting up, and found in the narrow space behind the counter, a new propane setup replacing her old one, which had been leaking slightly for 3 months. There was also a small folding table, the kind with rubber feet and a proper surface, replacing the overturned milk crate Lily used as a stool. And there was a small electric warming unit, plugged into the market's power strip, that she had not bought and had very much needed for the autumn evenings that were beginning to have a real edge. Emily stood looking at these things for a moment. Then she sat on the new folding table, it was quite sturdy, she noted, and let herself feel the mix of things she felt. There was gratitude, genuine and warm. There was also something fiercer, the part of her that had spent 3 years very specifically not accepting things from anyone, that had made a project of self-sufficiency, that had internalized the lesson from her marriage that accepting things from powerful people had a price you paid later in ways you hadn't agreed to. She was still sitting there when her phone buzzed. An email from the immigration office, informational in tone, advising her that a processing error in her previous renewal application had been corrected and her visa status was confirmed for the next 2 years. No action required on her part. Emily read the email twice. A processing error. She called the immigration office and was told, pleasantly, that the error had been identified and corrected automatically by their system. She ended the call and sat very still. When Yoo Jinho arrived that evening, and he always arrived in the last hour of her shift now, the market's late-night crowd, regular as the tide, Emily was ready for him. She'd spent the day deciding what to say. She waited until he had his corn dog in hand and then said, without preamble, the propane unit, the table, the visa. He met her eyes. He didn't deny it. The propane was a safety issue, he said. The table is better for the child. And my visa? Pause. An administrative correction. Emily looked at him steadily. She was not angry, which surprised her. She'd expected to be angry. She was something more complicated, moved and wary and grateful and resistant all at once, a tangle she didn't quite have language for. Yoo Jinho, she said, I'm not someone who can be bought. I know that, he said. No hesitation. Then what is this? He thought for a moment. She was learning one of his habits. He thought before he spoke, and what he said was precisely what he meant, with nothing around it for cushioning. It's what I can do, he said. When I can't do other things. She processed this. What other things? He didn't answer. She watched his jaw tighten slightly and released him from the question. I'll accept the propane, she said, because that's a safety issue and you're right. The table? Yes, for Lily. The visa? She paused. I can't decide about the visa yet. Ask me again. He nodded. This was, she understood, as close to negotiation as he got. He heard what she said and adjusted. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. She filed this away in the part of her brain that was quietly, involuntarily building a catalog of who he was. Lily solved several questions that evening by climbing up onto the new folding table and arranging her homework materials with proprietary satisfaction. This is much better than the crate, she informed Yoo Jinho. The crate had a splinter. Look. She presented her index finger. The splinter had been removed days ago, but there was a faint mark. I see, Yoo Jinho said gravely. Thank you for the table. You're welcome. My teacher says I have to learn to say thank you more, Lily said. But I already say it a lot. Emily says the same thing in Korean as 감사합니다. Can you say it in Korean for me? 감사합니다, he said. 감사합니다, Lily repeated carefully, with the determined tongue of a child learning. What else do you say in Korean? Many things. Teach me one. Emily, pretending to be very busy with the corn dog batter, was listening. Bogo Scipio, he said. It means, I miss you. A silence. Emily's hand stilled briefly on the mixing bowl. Bogo Scipio, Lily repeated. Who do you miss? The pause before he answered was different from his other pauses. My mother. She died a long time ago. Oh. Lily absorbed this with the solemn empathy of a child. I don't have a dad. He was bad, so we left him. Mommy says it's okay not to have things that hurt you. Emily went very still at the griddle, her back to both of them. She heard Yoo Jinho say quietly, "Your mother is right." Emily cleared her throat and turned around. She didn't trust her face for a moment, so she occupied herself with plating, but she snuck a glance at him from under her lashes. He was watching her with those black eyes, and there was something in them that she hadn't seen before, a kind of fragile alertness, as though he had discovered something by accident and wasn't sure what to do with it. Later, after Lily had been claimed by tiredness and was drowsing on her table, head on her arm, Emily and Yoo Jinho stood at the counter. The market around them thinned and quieted. He was looking at his hands, those scarred, strange hands. "Can I ask?" Emily said. He looked up. "Your hands?" She nodded toward them. "How old were you? When?" He turned them over as if he were seeing them for the first time. 14. When I started. I was from Incheon. There wasn't, he paused. There wasn't much else available. Emily reached out. She touched his right hand lightly, just the back of it, her fingertips over one old scar. He went very still, not tense, just still, as if she'd done something he'd forgotten was possible. "Surviving is a kind of strength," she said. "Even when it marks you." He looked at her hand on his for a long moment. "You know that?" "Yes," she said simply. They stood like that for a few seconds, the night market emptying around them, her hand light on his scarred knuckle. Then Emily picked up her spatula, and Yoo Jinho looked out at the lane, and the moment folded itself away and became part of something larger that neither of them named yet. The attack came on an evening when Lily had a runny nose and Emily almost hadn't opened the cart. She'd stood in their small apartment at 5:30, looking at her daughter's pink nose and bright eyes. Not sick enough to stay home, Lily had insisted, with the passionate advocacy of a child who'd been promised hot chocolate at the market that evening, and made the call that mothers always make, the weighing of practical versus protective that has no clean answer. She'd bundled Lily into an extra layer. She'd opened the cart at 6. Yoo Jinho was not there yet. He usually came at 9 or 10 in the market's last hours. It was 8:40 when the men appeared. There were 4 of them, and they were not like the 3 who had come before. These were not young men performing toughness. These were older, deliberate, and the one who came to the front of her cart had the flat effect of someone doing a job rather than a performance. That was more frightening, Emily discovered. Performance you could appeal to. Job was just job. He said, "Yoo Jinho has enemies. You've been seen with him. That makes you useful." Emily understood what useful meant. Her heart rate went to the kind of speed that makes your vision slightly sharp at the edges. But she kept her voice absolutely level. "Lily," she said without turning, using the tone she'd developed over years, the tone that said, "Do what I'm about to tell you without asking why. Go to Mrs. Park's cart and stay with her. Go now." "But Mommy." "Now baby. Please." She heard Lily slide off the table and the small quick footsteps going. She didn't breathe properly until she heard Mrs. Park's voice 2 stalls over say something in Korean that sounded like greeting. Then she turned back to the man at her counter. "She's gone," she said. "Whatever you want to discuss, we can discuss it without her here." "We're not here to discuss," he said. He reached across the counter. His hand closed around her wrist. Emily did not think. She reacted from a place that 3 years of not being afraid had built but 4 years of being hurt had seeded, a deep, animal understanding of the moment when talk is over. She twisted her wrist hard against the thumb joint, the way a self-defense instructor in Chicago had taught her once in a church basement, and when that didn't free her entirely she bit the man's forearm with everything she had. He made a sound and pulled back. It bought her 2 seconds. She used them to get behind the cart, to put the steel body of Little Chicago Seoul between herself and the 4 men, and she reached for the panic button, the one she'd installed herself 6 months ago, and pressed it. Then 2 things happened very fast. A crash somewhere behind the men, a stall being knocked over, the sound of running, and then Yoo Jinho was there. Emily had seen him composed. She had seen him still and controlled and deliberate. She had not seen him move at speed before. He was not composed now. He was something else, the thing that lived underneath the composure, the thing that had been built in the Incheon slums over 42 years, and it was terrifying and it was over in less time than she could properly process. When the lane was quiet again, the men gone, 2 of them in conditions she declined to examine too closely, the market security arriving 30 seconds too late and looking bewildered, Yoo Jinho turned to her. She stepped out from behind the cart. He was cut on the side of his jaw and there was something dark on his shirt sleeve. He was breathing hard. His eyes, when they found her, had a quality she hadn't seen in them before. Something raw and exposed, the look of someone who arrived a minute too late to their own nightmare and found it hadn't fully come true. Emily walked up to him. She took the hem of her apron, clean white, stained with corn dog batter on one corner, and reached up to his face. She pressed it gently to the cut on his jaw. He stood very still while she did it. "I bit someone," she said. Her voice was shaking now, a little, now that Lily was safe and the performance was over. "I saw," he said. He grabbed my wrist. Something moved through his face like weather. "I know. Lily is at Mrs. Park's cart." "I know. She's safe." Emily lowered the apron. She looked up at him, this enormous, dangerous, ruined, attentive man who had arrived at a run in a market lane because she was in danger. She thought about every time she'd told herself she didn't need anyone. She thought about the 4 years she'd spent making that true. "I can't stay here tonight," she said. "Lily can't." "Come with me," he said. "Both of you." "To where?" "Somewhere safe. My place. You can decide in the morning what comes next, but tonight you shouldn't be." He stopped. "Then, come with me." She got Lily from Mrs. Park. She locked the cart. She got into his car. The penthouse was the largest space Emily had been in since she'd left America. She stood in the center of the living room, floor-to-ceiling windows, the whole Seoul skyline laid out below like an argument for the city's beauty, and felt very small and very much herself and very tired. Lily turned in a slow circle. "Are we in a castle?" "Something like that," Yoo Jinho said. Emily got Lily settled on the enormous white couch with a blanket and a tablet running a Korean animated show she loved. She stood in the kitchen while Yoo Jinho, who she discovered could make tea, which seemed somehow domestically startling, put a cup in front of her. She wrapped her hands around it. "I need to know," she said, "what I'm in the middle of. What Lily is in the middle of." He sat across from her. He told her, not everything but enough. The Black Lotus syndicate, the rival group moving against him, the fact that she had been identified as a point of leverage because he'd been seen at her cart for a month. He was honest about what he was. He didn't clean it up. Emily listened. She asked 3 questions, all practical. She sat with what he'd told her. Then she looked up at him across her tea. "What happens now?" she said. He looked at her as if the answer to that question was, for the first time in his life, not something he was certain of. She reached across the table and took his hand. Not the light fingertip touch from the market. The whole thing, her hand in his, all the warmth of it. "Hey," she said quietly. "We're both still here." He looked at her hand in his for a long moment, and the thing that happened to his face was not any expression she could catalog. It was older than expressions. It was closer to what happens to a thing that's been frozen for a very long time when warmth finally finds it. He kissed her. It was not a grand, crashing thing, not the kind of kiss from stories, not fire and desperation. It was quiet and deliberate the way he did most things. But it was also the most earnest thing Emily had ever felt from another person's mouth, and she sat in it for a moment with her hands still wrapped around the tea and her eyes closed and thought, "Oh, here it is. This is what it was supposed to feel like." When she opened her eyes he was watching her. "I'm choosing this," she said, quietly but clearly. "I want you to know I'm choosing it. Not because I'm afraid in your protection. Because I want to." "I know," he said. "Good." She picked up her tea. She drank it. Across the vast white room Lily's cartoon played on, and the Seoul skyline glittered 40 floors below, and Emily Carter sat in a Mafia boss's kitchen choosing, for the first time in a long time, something for herself. 3 days after the attack, Emily opened the cart. Yoo Jinho's people had cleaned the lane. There was no evidence of what had happened. The cart itself was undamaged. The men hadn't touched Little Chicago Seoul, which she took as a small, bleak mercy. She arrived at 9 a.m. with her prep bag and her key and unlocked the panels and began setting up, and she was aware that she was being watched from across the lane by 2 men who were definitely not browsing the tteokbokki stall with genuine interest. She waved at them. One of them, after a startled moment, waved back. Yoo Jinho arrived at noon. "You're open," he said. "It's a Friday." "I'm always open Friday." "It's not safe." "It's my cart," she said pleasantly, flipping corn dogs. "It's my name on the permit. And my job and my visa and my daughter's school fees. So it's open." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down at the counter. "You could cook from the penthouse," he said. "I'll have supplies brought." "Absolutely not," Emily said. "That's very sweet and also completely wrong. My customers are here. My reputation is here. I built this from scratch and I'm not hiding it in a penthouse because someone's having a gang war." She handed him a corn dog. "Also, your men over there keep standing in the way of the good foot traffic lane. Can you ask them to move left?" He made a call. The men moved left. "Thank you," she said. He ate his corn dog. He had the slightly dazed expression of a man who has found himself in a situation he doesn't have protocols for. Emily felt a pulse of fondness for it. Over the next several evenings a shape emerged that was new. He stayed longer. Not just the last hour but from the evening sitting at the counter while the market filled and emptied. He drank her drip coffee and watched her work and talked, more than he'd ever talked. She learned things. His mother had been a seamstress. He'd had a dog when he was very young before everything got bad. He had never left Korea. You should, she said. Where? Everywhere. Chicago is ugly in February but beautiful in October. The lake goes silver in the afternoon and you can walk along it for miles. She considered. You'd probably hate the hot dogs though. You're a corn dog person. I can tell. He looked at her as if she had said something astonishing. What? She said. Nobody talks to me like that, he said. Like how? Like I'm ordinary. She paused. She thought about that. Well, she said, you eat corn dogs at a food cart every night. That's pretty ordinary. She tilted her head. I think that's maybe why you come back. He was quiet for a moment. Then, yes. I thought so. It was Lily who said it. It was an early evening, the cart just opened, Lily doing her homework on the proper table with the rubber feet, when Yoo Jinho appeared, earlier than usual, carrying a bag that turned out to contain, inexplicably, a set of colored pencils in approximately 47 shades. Lily discovered them and reacted with the full-body joy of a 7-year-old encountering 47 colored pencils. Appa, she said and then stopped. Emily went very still at the griddle. Lily looked up at Yoo Jinho with her gap-toothed, uncertain expression. I said Appa, she said. That means dad in Korean. Mrs. Kim at school taught me. I didn't mean to say it. She paused. Or maybe I did. I don't know. The silence in the little cart space was one of the most textured things Emily had ever sat inside. She turned slowly from the griddle. Yoo Jinho was looking at Lily with an expression that Emily had never seen on his face, absolutely unguarded, something ancient and cracked open and very, very tender. Lily was watching him with those hazel eyes. Is that okay? He crouched down, which brought his enormous frame to eye level with her, and looked at Lily for a long moment. Yes, he said. His voice was different. Quieter. That's okay. Lily beamed and went back to her colored pencils. Yoo Jinho straightened and looked at Emily, and Emily was not going to cry in front of customers or her daughter or at all, probably, but she looked back at him with very bright eyes and said nothing, and he nodded once, and that was its own full conversation. That night, after Lily was asleep in the penthouse guest room, Emily sat with him on the wide balcony looking at the city. The Han River was a dark ribbon far below, threaded with light. I want to understand your world, she said. Not hide from it. Not be protected from it. Understand it. It's not a world I'd choose for anyone. You didn't choose it either. Not at the start. She looked at him. Tell me what's happening. With the rival group. What's the strategy? I'm not an idiot and I'm not fragile. He told her. She listened to all of it, asking sharp questions that surprised him, processing the logic of it, the territories, the betrayals, the leverage, with the same practical intelligence she applied to market schedules and corn dog batter recipes. You need to protect your supply routes first, she said at the end. Everything else follows from that. That's true in any business. He looked at her. I ran a food cart on a shoestring, she said. Supply chain is supply chain. For the first time in her knowledge of him, Yoo Jinho laughed. It was a short thing, rusty with disuse, but it was real and it transformed his face briefly into something that reminded her he was a human being who had once been a boy with a dog. She tucked her feet under her on the balcony chair and looked at the river. Equal partners, she said. That's the only way this works. You don't make decisions for me. I don't hide from yours. Equal partners, he repeated, as though it were a phrase in a language he was learning. Yes. I've never had one of those. No, she said. I know. But you're going to have one now. The mountain-safe house was in the hills 2 hours east of Seoul, a property tucked into pine trees with a view that would have been beautiful in different circumstances. There were 6 bodyguards, 2 cars, a satellite phone, and no cell signal below the ridge. Emily had 3 days to fill before Yoo Jinho could get to them. She cooked. It was the most natural thing, the most Emily thing, the thing she reached for when the rest of the world was going sideways. On the first morning she inventoried the kitchen, a good one, stocked by whoever maintained the property, and began. She made doenjang jjigae because the bodyguard named Choi had mentioned the night before that his grandmother used to make it. She made pancakes for Lily with a particular indeterminate fluffiness that required buttermilk and patience. She made a pot of something that wasn't quite anything from her menu but that she invented on the spot from the ingredients available. A kimchi corn stew that turned out unexpectedly good. The bodyguards, large, serious men who had clearly not anticipated a civilian woman commandeering the kitchen, ate everything she put in front of them with a reverence that made her quietly proud. "You don't have to cook for us," Choi told her on the second morning, watching her from the doorway with a slightly confused respect. "I know," she said. "But you're all out there worrying about us and I'm in here with nothing useful to do. This is what I do. Let me do it." He went back to his post. She cooked. Lily, meanwhile, conducted what Emily could only describe as a sociological investigation of the bodyguards. By the second afternoon she knew all 6 of their names and had taught 4 of them the English words for 14 different colored pencils. She was teaching the 5th one long division when Emily decided Lily would probably be fine. Emily was the one who was less fine. She kept her own fear in the back kitchen while she cooked. She took it out at night after Lily was asleep, and sat with it in the dark of the narrow bedroom turning it over. Fear for him, specifically, which was its own discovery, the knowledge that she was afraid for him, not just afraid of the situation. Fear that the situation would resolve itself in a way she couldn't fix. Fear that she had let Lily call him Appa and now Lily would know loss in a new shape. She thought about the food cart. She thought about the night she'd arrived in Seoul with 1 suitcase and a tiny heartbeat inside her and 0 Korean and a terror she'd dressed up as determination because she couldn't afford to let it be anything else. She thought about how many times she'd been afraid and cooked through it anyway. She thought about Marcus and how fear in that apartment had always felt like walls closing in. How this fear was different, open-edged, outward, the fear of someone who loves something outside herself and is terrified of losing it. That was a different kind of fear. It was the kind that meant she had things worth being afraid for. That helped. He came on the 3rd night. Emily heard the car in the drive before the bodyguards knocked on her door, and she was already up. She hadn't been sleeping, not really, and she was in the kitchen when he came through the door, Choi and another man behind him. He was injured. She'd known, looking at him, that the past 3 days had been bad. He moved wrong, carefully, right side favoring, and there was a bandaged section on his left forearm she could see at the cuff. His face was the face of someone who had been operating on something beyond exhaustion and hadn't found the off switch yet. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She wasn't sure he'd have done it if anyone else had asked. She got the medical kit. She'd found it on the first morning and moved it to the kitchen, which she'd decided was logical, and worked on his arm in the yellow kitchen light. He hissed once, quietly, when she cleaned the edge of the bandaged cut. She kept her hand steady. "Tell me it's going the right direction," she said. "It's going the right direction." "How much longer?" "Days." "Not many." And then it's over." He looked at her steadily. "I promise you it's over." She finished the bandage. She tied it off. She held his arm for a moment, both hands around his wrist, feeling the pulse there, quick, strong, alive. "I cooked for your bodyguards," she said. Choi cried a little at the doenjang jjigae. "He thought I didn't notice." He looked at her. "I'm not going to tell anyone," she said. "Very safe. Chef's confidentiality." Something relaxed in him, incrementally, the way a held breath releases. "Emily," he said. "Yes." He reached into his jacket pocket. He held something out. It was small, sitting in his palm, a ring simply made, a single dark stone, no ceremony to its presentation. He had not, she suspected, practiced what to say. "I don't have words for..." He stopped. He tried again. "Everything I am now that's better than what I was." "That's you." "I know I'm not." Another stop. "I know what I am. What I've done. I'm not asking you to forgive what came before. I'm asking if you'll stay for what comes next." Emily looked at the ring in his palm for a long moment. She thought about everything she'd decided 3 years ago in Seoul, about what her life was going to be and wasn't going to be. She thought about practical. She thought about how the most impractical thing she'd ever done was hand a bleeding stranger her last 2 corn dogs. She took the ring. She put it on her own finger, which was its own kind of statement. She hadn't waited for him to do it. She'd done it herself, the way she did most things, and held up her hand to look at it in the yellow kitchen light. "Yes," she said. He looked at her hand for a long moment. Something in his face was rearranged permanently, in a way that had nothing to do with injury. "Lily," he said. "Lily is going to be absolutely insufferable about being right," Emily said. "She told me 3 weeks ago that you were the kind of dragon that was actually good. She's going to reference this for years." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Good," he said. He stayed the night. He slept in the chair in the kitchen, refusing the bed with a practicality that she understood. He needed to be able to hear the door, and in the morning Lily found him there and climbed onto his lap without ceremony and announced that she'd taught all 6 bodyguards to say, "Good morning," in English and was going to teach them, "Good afternoon" next. He sat with her small weight on his lap in the mountain kitchen with the pine light coming through the window and Emily making pancakes at the stove, and the 3 of them were, in the middle of a war in a pine forest with 6 bodyguards outside and a rival syndicate somewhere in the hills, entirely, improbably at home. Spring returned to Hongdae in late March, the cherry trees along the market lane coming into blossom as if they'd been waiting for a cue. Emily opened the cart on the first warm Friday of the year with a new batch of corn dog batter and a ring on her finger and a slightly adjusted menu that now included a honey butter kimchi waffle she developed during the winter that had become, quietly, her most talked about item. The market had missed her. She hadn't expected that. The warmth of it, the halmiani from the produce stall 2 lanes over who pressed her hand and said something in rapid Korean that Emily only half caught but understood was welcoming. 3 regulars who turned up in the first hour. The university students who'd been coming since she opened, who were now in their final year, who stopped and told her they'd been waiting. She cooked in the morning light with the blossom falling past the cart and felt something settle in her chest that she didn't have a word for. It was close to right whatever it was. Yoo Jinho was there but not at the counter. He was across the lane, talking to someone on his phone, in the particular position of a man who has decided that hanging around a food cart is where he belongs but is trying to do it without being obvious about it. Emily watched him from the corner of her eye and thought, he's terrible at subtle. Lily was at school, thriving in the specific way of a child for whom stability has made the whole world expand. She had 3 best friends, a teacher she adored, and a recent fixation on marine biology that Emily was fully supporting. She came home from school and told Yoo Jinho facts about octopi with the thoroughness of a researcher. The news about Marcus arrived on a Tuesday. Not a phone call, an email forwarded through her mother, and then a second one directly from a lawyer in Chicago. Marcus Novak had learned, through some combination of social media and international determination, that Emily was in Seoul. He had filed paperwork. He had been making noise about parental rights. Emily read the email at the cart, standing between the morning rush and the afternoon lull, and felt something. Not the old fear, not the body-going quiet thing, not the walls closing in thing. Something different, a clean, bright anger, and underneath it, something even cleaner. She was not afraid of him anymore. She had not known that until this moment, not fully known it, and its arrival was like surfacing from deep water into sunlight. She forwarded the emails to her lawyer. She called Yoo Jinho. "He's been in Korea," Yoo Jinho said after a pause. "For about a week. I was going to tell you when I had more information." Emily absorbed this. What kind of information? The kind that confirms he's not a legal threat. His parental claim is weak. You have sole custody in Illinois, he has a documented restraining order, and a Korean family court is going to look at that very carefully. Pause. He's also being encouraged to reconsider his visit. Encouraged how? She said. A careful silence. Legally. Jinho. Within legal parameters, he said. Emily. She understood what within legal parameters meant from him, and decided that she was at peace with it. She had not asked him to do anything. He had done it because she was his priority, the way he'd said she was on the very first night they'd spoken. She no longer had the reflexive resistance to that word, priority. She had learned that being someone's priority and being independent were not the same problem. They could coexist. She had learned that from him, slowly, and from herself, slowly, over months of being both. Marcus left Korea 4 days later. Her lawyer received confirmation that the paperwork had been withdrawn. Emily stood at the cart that evening and watched the blossom move in the lane and thought about the woman in the Chicago suburbs bathroom, 3 years ago, who had made a decision in the quiet of a snowfall. She thought, I would go back and tell her that it works out. I would tell her that Seoul is real and the cart is real and Lily is magnificent. I would tell her the next man she meets will be a terrifying mafia kingpin who eats corn dogs and lets a 7-year-old call him Appa and laughs, once in a while, with a rusty joy that sounds like he's remembering how. I would tell her she's going to be okay. She was going to be okay. Yoo Jinho materialized at the counter. She'd stopped being surprised by how quietly he moved, and set his phone face down in the counter's table way he'd developed. That meant, I'm here now, work can wait. Marcus, he said. Done, she said. He nodded. Thank you, she said, for handling it the way you did. Without me having to ask. You'd have handled it yourself if I hadn't. Yes, she agreed. But I didn't have to. That's different. He looked at her steadily. She thought he was going to say something, but instead he just stayed there at the counter, which was its own kind of sentence. She made him a corn dog. She made herself one too, which she almost never did, and she leaned on the counter beside the griddle and they ate together in the blossom-falling market lane, and Emily Carter was 34 years old and the ring on her finger caught the lamplight, and she was not afraid of anything. She did not want a traditional wedding venue. She had said this to Yoo Jinho early, very directly, in the way she said most things to him now, simply and without apology. He had looked at her and said, "Where then?" And she had told him. They closed the Hongdae market on a Saturday evening in early May. The market association, who were, collectively, both charmed and slightly bewildered by the situation, agreed with a graciousness that moved her. The vendors strung lights. The halmiani from the produce stall appeared with armloads of flowers she pressed on Emily with such insistence that Emily's entire cart space became something between a chapel and a garden. Emily got dressed in the small bathroom of the market's management office with Jion, who had been bridesmaid in all the ways that mattered, which was mostly, brought coffee and kept Lily calm during the veil argument, zipping her into a dress that was white and simple and had a practical hemline because Emily was not going to trip at her own wedding. She looked at herself in the mirror. She had put her hair up, which she almost never did. There were small flowers in it, from the halmiani, pressed on her with great ceremony, and her eyes were hazel and her face was the face she'd had for 34 years, a little more lined around the eyes than it used to be, from 3 years of outdoor cooking in Seoul weather. She was beautiful. She had not thought about herself that way in years, had not had the bandwidth for it, and it arrived unexpectedly, this recognition quietly, the way the best things usually arrived. "Mommy," Lily said from her position beside Emily's knee, in a white dress with a green sash that she had selected herself with enormous conviction. "You look like a queen." "I look like a mom," Emily said. "That's better." Lily considered this. "Maybe both," she allowed generously. Emily crouched down to her daughter's level and looked at those hazel eyes, this person she had carried across the world and fed and tucked in and worried over and laughed with, this magnificent small human who had called a Mafia boss Dragon King and had been absolutely right about him all along. "You ready?" she said. Lily held up the small woven basket of flower petals she'd been entrusted with. "I've been practicing," she said seriously. "I did the whole hallway already. Mrs. Kim says I have excellent range." "Excellent range," Emily agreed. "Let's go." The lane had been transformed. The lights were gold and warm, strung between the cart awnings, and the flower stall and the tteokbokki stand in Little Chicago Seoul were all lit up, and the market smelled like sesame and blossom and the particular Seoul spring air that Emily had come to love more than she'd ever loved the smell of Lake Michigan, which she hadn't expected. The guests were small in number, Jion and her brother. Mrs. Park from the neighboring stall. The university students, 4 of them, unofficial, who Emily had mentioned the date to and who had appeared anyway, which she found perfect. Choi, the bodyguard who had cried at the Dunjang Jigi, wearing what appeared to be a new suit. A few others from Yoo Jinho's orbit, men who had the carefully composed faces of people trying to look casual at a wedding when they mostly dealt with territory disputes. And Yoo Jinho, standing at the end of the lane in front of Little Chicago Seoul. He was wearing dark clothes. He always wore dark clothes. She'd stopped expecting anything different, but there was a single white flower in his lapel that she recognized from the halmiani's armload. He had put it there himself, she could tell, slightly crooked, the gesture of a man who had no protocol for flowers. She loved him completely standing there. Lily set off down the lane scattering petals with the efficient thoroughness of someone who has practiced. Emily walked behind her, slowly, in no hurry, looking at the man at the end of the lane looking at her. The way he looked at her, which she had finally fully understood, not as something he owned, not as something he'd acquired, but as something he hadn't known could exist and was still slightly astonished by. The officiant, a judge that Yoo Jinho had somehow produced as he produced most practical things without explaining the mechanism, said the necessary words. Emily and Yoo Jinho said the words back. When it came to her vows, she had written her own. She held the small card she'd written them on. She'd handwritten them at the cart actually on a Tuesday morning before the prep work started, which seemed right, and read, "I have fed people my whole life. I have fed my daughter and my customers and 6 bodyguards in a mountain safe house and one very large and very difficult man who showed up bloodied at my food cart in the rain. I have learned that feeding someone is how I say, 'I see you, I'm here, there is something warm here for you. I'm going to keep feeding you. Every day in every way that I can. And I know, because I have watched you and learned you and decided you, that you will spend every day trying to be someone worth feeding. That's the deal. That's all I need." Lily beside her was nodding very seriously. Yoo Jinho had not written vows. He had told her honestly that he had tried and it had not gone well, that words were not his medium, that what he could offer instead was this. He would be there. Every evening at the counter. Every morning wherever they woke up. He would be there and she would not be alone, not ever again, not because she needed him to be but because he was choosing, every day to be. That's enough, she had said when he'd told her. That's everything, he'd said. He slid the ring onto her finger, beside the one she'd put on herself in the mountain safe house, which she'd refused to move, and she looked at both rings and thought that they were, together, a complete story. They kissed in the market lane in the gold light, with Lily making a sustained approving sound beside them and Choi wiping his face very discreetly. The reception was corn dogs and kimchi waffle and tteokbokki from Mrs. Park's stall and a cake that Jiyeon had ordered from a bakery in Sinchon. There was makgeolli and there was that brand of American beer that Emily liked and had never found at a Korean wedding before but which appeared at this one, because Yoo Jinho had had it imported, because he paid attention. He always paid attention. Later, much later, after Lily had fallen asleep on Choi's shoulder and been carefully carried to a car, and after the last of the lights had been reeled in and the market lane had gone quiet, Emily stood on the small upper balcony of the apartment building that abutted the market, the one she'd lived in for a year before they'd moved, where Jiyeon still kept a spare key. She looked at the lane below. Little Chicago Seoul, closed and locked, its hand-painted sign faint in the late light. The market, empty now, its nighttime quiet, the particular quiet of a place that will be alive again in 12 hours. The Seoul spring sky above it, amber at the horizon, going dark. She thought about the woman who had landed at Incheon airport with one suitcase and a secret heartbeat and a terror she'd dressed as determination. She thought about all the mornings she'd prepped the cart alone, all the rainy nights, all the math she'd done in her head before sleep. She thought about the first time Lily laughed in this city, a real laugh, a child who belongs somewhere laugh, and how Emily had cried later in the bathroom because she'd needed to cry somewhere Lily couldn't hear. She thought about a rainy Wednesday and a bleeding stranger and 2 corn dogs. One small act of kindness. That was all it had been. She had been exhausted and practical and entirely focused on her 14 corn dogs and her rent and her visa and her daughter, and someone had appeared out of the dark and she had, without planning to, offered them the last thing she had to give. That was who she was. She had been that person in a bathroom in Chicago, packing a suitcase. She had been that person on a plane crossing the Pacific with a child in her belly and nothing assured. She had been that person every night at this cart, every morning in this city, every time she looked at Lily and chose, again deliberately every single day, to be the mother Lily needed. That was the whole story. Not the Mafia boss. Not the danger or the penthouse or the war. Those were the circumstances. The story was Emily Carter, who fed people, who looked dangerous men in the eye, who built something from zero and refused to hide it when the world got complicated, who had enough love left over after everything she'd survived to give it again, to a difficult, scarred, earnest man who ate corn dogs every night and let a 7-year-old call him Appa and loved her, quietly and absolutely, like a man who had found the one thing he'd always needed and would be careful with it every day of his life. A hand on her shoulder. Warm, solid, present. She leaned back against him and looked at the lane below and breathed the spring Seoul air. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Very okay. Good." Below them, Little Chicago Seoul sat in its lane in the dark of the Hongdae market, waiting for morning, waiting for the next corn dog, waiting for the next customer who would appear hungry and be fed. Always fed. That was and had always been the whole point.